All right, here's a quick reference of the code that we're going to be writing before we get started. So we're modifying a script that we created in the last episode. So what we did in this episode is we added the public Boolean single shot, and that gives us a checkbox in the inspector. And when we check that box to true, then we are not going to do all of the stuff from the previous tutorial. Also, I created a new void shoot now, and I moved the instantiate, so basically create the bullet at the spawn point and the spawn rotation. I wrote shoot now right here instead so that it calls the void and then creates the bullet. That way we can also reference it here, where inside of shoot button down, we say if single shot. So if we want to shoot a bullet once every time we pull the trigger, then it's going to say shoot now. So either right here or right here, it will create a bullet. And then that void is shoot button down. And then we have a variable right here that we're not going to use in this particular tutorial, but we just need to put it there so that we don't get an error message. So anyways, shoot button down is called up here. So we have an event, shoot.action.started, and started basically means when the button is first pressed, and plus equal, and then we're going to add this void to this event. So yeah, that's basically the code we're going to write. So in our last video, we learned how to shoot balls out of a gun attached to our VR hands, and it was like rapid fire, one after another shots. Now we're just going to take the exact same code, and we're going to make it so that we can switch back and forth easily by just checking a little checkbox in the inspector between the way that we had it before, or just every single time we press the trigger and not when we're holding down the trigger. So this should be a pretty simple modification to the code that we've already done. So yeah, let's jump into it. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, please check out my game Jet Island. It is a ton of fun, and it's available now on Steam, and I'm really, really proud of that game. And yeah, if you like VR physics and movement and swinging around in an open, crazy world and giant boss fights, it's definitely a really good game. So yeah, now let's jump into the tutorial. All right, so now we're going to learn how to shoot a bullet every time we pull the trigger and just when we first pull down the trigger. So in the previous tutorial, we learned how to shoot at a rate of per second. So we did like 5 bullets per second while you're holding down the trigger. You do need to go watch that tutorial first, but just in case you didn't, real quick, we're just going to need the input system. We're going to, in the project manager, right click, create, and input actions, and name it whatever you want. Click on generate C# class, double click on it, and then that will open up this. So we're going to create an action maps and an action, and then choose the button that we want it to be. And then we need an input action manager just anywhere in our scene, and you're going to click on the plus and drag and drop the input actions that you just created right there. And that is all the setup we need. Oh, also we have a VR player script. So that's the script that we're going to edit. So just in case you jumped into this tutorial without watching the previous one, that's basically what we did. So now let's go into our VR player script and see what we need to do. So first of all, I want to make this script so that it can either shoot bullets while you're holding down the trigger, or we can change it in the inspector to only shoot 1 bullet once every time we pull down the trigger. So we're going to need a true-false variable that we can check on and off with a check mark in the inspector that's going to determine whether or not we do all of this. So we're going to write public bool, which is short for boolean, and that is basically a true-false variable. And we're going to call this single shot, just like that. So if I go back into Unity, you can see when I click on the XR origin, which is where we have our player script, we now have a single shot checkbox that we can check on and off. So I'm going to leave that off for just a second. And now back in our code, what we're going to want to do is put all of this inside of an if statement and have all of the stuff from our previous tutorial only happen if single shot is set to false. So we're going to write if whoops, whoops, single shot equal false. That's one way to write it. Another way that you can write it is writing exclamation mark single shot. Exclamation mark kind of means like not. So if not single shot, so if it is set to false. So you can write it either way. And then we're going to take these opening and closing squiggly brackets. We're going to delete that there and then put a new one right there. And now let me just delete that to just kind of clean things up and make it easier to read. Now everything inside of these two brackets is everything from the previous tutorial. So everything that we did from the previous tutorial will now only work if this is set to false or unchecked. So next we need to create a new void. So you can see that we have void update and void start. This happens at the start of the game, and this happens every single frame. So we're going to create our own custom void, and it will only happen when we tell it to happen. So to do that, you just write void, and then you name it anything you want. I'm going to call this shoot now. And then we need an opening and closing parenthesis. And now everything that inside of here, that will happen anytime we call shoot now. So actually what I'm going to do is, since this line of code is what actually creates the bullet, I'm going to cut that with Control X and paste it with Control V. And now we have the actual part where we create the bullet inside of shoot now. And then right here, the line of code where we used to have this, we can write shoot now, opening, closing parenthesis, semicolon. So now this line of code here, when we write shoot now, it will call shoot now and it will do that line of code. And then we can also shoot now from other places. So we want to add this to an event that only happens when we press down the button, only once when we press down the button. So I'm actually going to create one more void. I'm going to call it void shoot, shoot button, down, like that. And we actually need to add one more thing. It's kind of weird. We're not going to use it in this tutorial, but it's going to prevent us from getting an error message. And that is input action dot callback context space context. Technically, context, you can name that anything you want, but all of the examples on the internet I've seen call it context. So for the sake of consistency, you might as well just call it context. And this is very useful in the input system. We can get a lot of information about the button being pressed, but we're not going to use that in this particular video. So just remember that this right here is put there just so that we don't get an error message. So we're going to add this shoot button down to only happen when we press the button down. And what we want to do in here is actually shoot now. And we don't want to just only shoot now just anytime. We want to add an if statement and say if single shot. And let's tab that over just for the sake of making it easier to read. So I did not add the exclamation mark here. So we're asking if single shot equals true. Another way you could write that, is writing equals equals true, just like that. But it's a little bit more clean to just ask if single shot. So now when this gets called, we're going to check to see if single shot is true. And if it is true, then we're going to shoot now. So once again, this isn't actually going to happen yet until we add this somewhere. So this is the main way of calling a custom void that you've created. And now I'm going to show you one more way. So there is an event that we can get from the shoot variable, which is of type input action reference. So to do that, we're going to write shoot.action started. So started basically means when the button event has started. And so basically the very split second that we press the button down. And so this is an event. It's just going to do its own thing, and we need to add shoot button down to this event. And to do that, we simply write plus equal shoot button down and semicolon, just like that. So we don't actually need to write the opening and closing parentheses. That would give us an error message. We just need to have it just like that. And also, one more thing, if I were to delete this, like let's say we forgot to write that, I will also get an error message. So let's hit Control Z. So we need that there so that we don't get that error message. So I'm going to save that and go back into Unity, and this is all the code that we need today. All right, so we're back in Unity. So make sure that you have SteamVR running and run the game. Also make sure that your finger is over top of the proximity sensor on your headset, or just wear your headset. And here we go, you can see the gun, and because we have single shot unchecked or set to false, it is the way that it was before, and I can just hold down the button and shoot bullets just like that. But now, if I go over here and I check single shot, and also this is just a side note, but while the game is running, any changes that you make are just temporary. They won't save. As soon as you stop the game, they will revert back to the way they were. So if you make a bunch of changes, make sure you do it while the game's not running. Otherwise, you won't be able to save them. While the game's running, it's kind of just like so you can test things out and change things temporarily to see if that fixes stuff. So anyways, I set single shot to true. So now let's go back into the game. And now I'm holding down the button right now, and I only shot one bullet. So every time I pull the trigger, it shoots a bullet. So I'm holding, let go, holding, let go, holding. So yeah, it only shoots a bullet once every time I pull the trigger. So yeah, that wasn't too complicated of a tutorial. This is basically just like a starting point. So yeah, that was the tutorial. Alright, I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you want to check out my main channel and see the game that I am working on, it is giant boss fights, and it's going to be way more dark and scary than Jet Island was, and it's using photogrammetry graphics, which has been a lot of fun learning how to do photogrammetry. I think that might be my new favorite way of creating 3D artwork, because I really love photography and 3D video game stuff, and photogrammetry just combines those two things. It's really, really cool. So yeah, if I do decide to do a Patreon in the future, link in the description to that, and help me out with the YouTube algorithm, because this is a brand new channel. And yeah, I guess until my next video, I'll see you later, and keep making games.